This is the Therapy Chat podcast with Laura Reagan, LCSW-C. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. And now, here's your host, Laura Reagan, LCSW-C.
Hi, welcome back to Therapy Chat. I'm your host, Laura Reagan, and today I'm very excited to be speaking with Antonieta Contreras. Antonieta, thank you so much for being my guest today on Therapy Chat.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. I'm really excited to talk with you about your book, Traumatization and Its Aftermath. And before we get into our topic of kind of being a trauma-focused therapist and how having a systemic approach to trauma therapy is different from maybe the traditional therapy approach that people are familiar with, will you just tell our audience a little bit more about who you are, where you're practicing, and just a little more of what you do?
Okay, yeah, I'm in New York City, and this is my last career, I say, because I chose it to retire, right? That's my retirement, is working to help people feel better, be better, and heal from the difficulties. I decided to do this after I became a Buddhist and realized how difficult it was for so many people, even with all the hours of dedication to meditation and to all that spiritual growth, to make progress because of the emotional difficulties that they had. And that's when I realized that that was important, and that was a nice purpose in life. So I became a mental health professional, and that's what I do full time. Very passionate about that.
Yes, and you have a private practice in New York City, right?
Private practice in New York City. I also run groups, supervision groups for like EMDR or trauma focus, and to supervise people. And I used to teach. I stopped teaching to write a book, but I used to teach trauma, all the foundation, all the neurobiology and the fundamentals of trauma, the trauma lens, and the paradigm shift from the way we used to see psychology before, and how now we are incorporating a different understanding of mental health and human behavior. And I am writing my second and my third book together. No, like the first book, I was not able to put everything I wanted because of the publisher. So I have already part of what was going to be the second book. But then I realized that I needed to create a book about conceptualizing trauma cases. I think that's missing. We don't have like a clear understanding of how to conceptualize them. So I'm about to finish that book, and then I will continue with the treatment. So that's what I do besides seeing clients and supervising clinicians. And of course, training like every other therapist, right? Like we are always learning something new.
Yes. And, I've said this before and here on the podcast, that it's such an exciting time to be a trauma therapist, because we're learning just so much right now as we are. It's like we're learning all this new cutting edge stuff as we're here practicing now. It's a very exciting time to find all the ways that healing is possible, not just coping or even recovering, but healing, you know? And that I'm like you, I want to see people experience healing.
Yes, and I've seen it, and I know it's possible. I've seen people from being completely dysregulated and dysfunctional to become very fulfilled and having like a very functional life. So I know it is possible, and that encourages me to continue growing and dedicating effort to this mission.
Same. I've seen it. I've experienced it myself. I'm experiencing it as I continue through my life, as I continue healing and growing. And it's like, I don't know if you agree with this, but something that I'm noticing with a lot of the training, the academic training process in, at least I'll say with social work. I'm a social worker. The social workers I see coming through who are interns or new grads and people who are counselors too. Those two fields that are, when it comes to therapy, people are seemingly learning and hearing that it's almost as if you can do some skills to teach the client some skills, and then the trauma will go away from them, as if it's like not, a spiritual wound, an existential crisis. Skills don't address an existential crisis, or maybe there are skills that do, but I feel like there's like a mechanical way that people are learning about therapy, as if it's just like, with this, this symptom, you do this. With this, they're dysregulated, get them regulated, and it's that's part of it, but that's not the whole picture.
Obviously, yes, absolutely agree with you. And it is sad that some people prefer to apply formulas, and they believe that applying formulas is going to make the trick. And no, I think that we are so different from each other. Every single person has different circumstances. The amount of, I used to be a mathematician, right? So the combinations from mom, dad, grandparents, like blah, blah, and life experiences create a completely different set of challenges for every person. So yes, it would be nice to believe that we can apply formulas and help people heal, but no. And that's why what you mentioned before, the systemic approach is what I use, because for how many decades people have been dealing with either the past or memories. And people think that dealing with trauma means dealing with traumatic memories. And unfortunately, that's not the case, right? Our nervous system is the part that plays the most important role in trauma, because is the programs that we have, innate programs to protect us, to protect our integrity of our life, the ones that get activated. And when they get activated, they mess up a lot of our psyche, our body, our emotional responses, our perception. Just very recently, they discovered that what we thought they were memories after traumatic events are not memories, because it's not the way we store memories, is an imprint in our perception, what happens. So we immediately see things different. It's not that we remember they are dangerous, it's that now we see them as dangerous. And that's completely different, right? So now that we are learning so much, I think that is very necessary to understand all the parts that get altered, that get modified with trauma, and take care of each one of them to help people recover the full functionality. It's not only like memories or or even the body movement, right? They are all part of healing, but the other parts need to be taken care of as well.
Right. So I think, just to make sure I understood your point there, you're saying that people think healing trauma, if they think of healing trauma, or what trauma therapy is supposed to do, is relieve trauma memories. And that is one thing that may happen, that one may stop reliving traumatic experiences in their mind. That may be one of the outcomes of successful trauma therapy, but that's not necessarily the process or the goal.
Right. Well, even what you're saying, is very important to clarify, because we want to remove the negative emotion that is stored, connected to the pieces of memory, for us to not have the reactivity that we have when we get triggered, right? So that's what we want to the memory reconciliation thing, the removal of the negative emotion connected to. But the memories actually will never disappear. The same way that scars don't disappear when we have a cut, right? We will always remember that we had a cut in that place because there is a scar in there. And some people get very frustrated because they still remember those things, right? We will never forget. And the more we remember them, the stronger they become in our brain, because that's the instruction that our brain receives. Oh, this memory is important, so I will not erase it, right? So yes, the memories will stay there, but we don't want to have the same type of reaction when we encounter things that are similar. So yeah, that's even another misconception or misunderstanding about memory is that if you don't remember your childhood, that means you were traumatized or you have problems, right? Even this morning, I was with a group that I supervise, and I asked them, which one of you remembers your childhood well? And they all say, "Oh, not me, not me, not me." Yeah, because our brain is busy learning more important things and to storing details about our days, right? So we don't need to recover memories that sometimes are not even stored because the brain was busy with something else. So there are,
recovering memories is something else that people sometimes think, I just need to remember what happened. I just need to remember what happened. And I understand sometimes it's deeply distressing for people when they know something happened and they only remember one maybe flashbulb moment of that experience and the rest is dissociated. And so they're like, I need to know what happened. It's like, that's why they go to therapy. And oftentimes too, people may want EMDR for that reason. I need to retrieve these memories that are there, that are hidden from me. And it's almost like it can become, I've seen people be quite obsessed with that need to remember. And I always tell people, I know it feels important, but that's not necessarily the key to healing for you. The key is to address the way what you've been through has impacted you in the present moment. And, through that process, you may end up beginning to remember more about the incident, but that's not our goal. If that happens, that's okay, but that's not the goal of the work. So yeah, people really do have some misconceptions about what to expect in trauma therapy, maybe some outdated ideas. So when you talk about a systemic approach, can you explain really what you mean by that?
Yeah. So, something that is not discussed frequently is the connection between trauma and the loss of internal equilibrium. So when symptoms become kind of permanent or long-lasting, when we get the diagnosis of PTSD or complex PTSD, is when the nervous system loses the balance between its branches, right? So instead of the sympathetic and parasympathetic working to balance each other, they do their own thing. That's the survival mode, right? Is when they are operating on their own and we don't have equilibrium. Well, that is easy to see in PTSD, but in complex trauma, it's much more difficult to see, because then the homeostasis is not the model that we apply. We apply the allostatic model, which is these small changes that happen in our system all the time when we are scared today and then scared tomorrow. But it's not like this, the full panic. It's just the stress and the stress and the stress. So to give you an example, if I cry a lot today, just to give a simple example, I'm going to be thirsty because I need more water. I need to replenish. Or if I sweat a lot, right, I will be thirstier because my body is needing more water. If I don't give it water, if I don't drink water, my system will take some water from wherever it can, like diet, right? Why do we lose weight when we don't eat? Because the brain needs that energy. And if I am not giving that energy with the food, it's going to go and take it from the fat that is stored in my body and takes the energy from that fat, right? So in that way, that is kind of how the body is always trying to find equilibrium. So when we go through an experience that scares us to death, right, that we get so extremely disturbed by it that our brain believes that needs to save our lives, right? That's the brain is starting to do that. It's going to create a lot of imbalance in everywhere, because it's using that energy to keep us alive, right? To create all the protections that we use when we are struggling for survival. And when that happens, maybe some of our organs get, digestive system, for example, is probably the first one that gets affected.
Yeah.
Right? And our immune system gets affected too, and other things. But the same way, our cognition gets affected because some of the functions in the brain stop working or slow down its intervention, right? So the prefrontal cortex, executive functions go down, right? For example. And so that's the brain, the body, and then the mind, because our emotions are going to store information that are going to find things much more dangerous than we used to see them, right? So we have alterations in every internal system that we have, and then it starts affecting our external world, because we don't trust the people the same way, we don't communicate in the same way, we don't behave the way we used to behave, right? So it affects us in so many different ways that if we don't see that they are all connected, we are not really targeting the problem. The problem is a lack of balance between body, mind, people, right? So society, and even beliefs. What you were talking about, the spiritual wound. Well, we are not going to perceive things. We are even creativity or abstraction that are in these parts of the brain may be disconnected. So we may even stop believing in God or feel that God abandoned us or whatever. So it creates all those these arrays. And if we don't see them, how they are connected, we only believe that it's memory or is what else? Even only the regulation. If you meditate, you will be calmer, right? No, but like you need to also assess all the other changes that this person suffer in every aspect and take care of them one by one, like the sense of self, the identity, the personality, the faith, the hope, the trust, like all the ways that they relate to the world get affected as well. I know a lot of people, colleagues that treat people that have no sense of self. Like, who are you talking to if this person changes their mind every time somebody gives them an opinion, right? If somebody says, oh, I think you are nice, then they come and they believe they are nice, right? And that's the self that you have in front of you. But the day after, somebody says, oh, you are nasty. And then the week after, you are now dealing with a nasty person because that's the self that is present. So if you don't work with the sense of self, you are not going to make as much progress in healing, because who is going to feel safe if there is no self to feel safe, that can feel safe?
Yeah. And so that idea of people who don't have a sense of self, what would be, if you were to describe that in terms of traumatic wounding or traumatization, an effect of traumatization, how would you see that?
Well, first you will find the root of whether the self was not developed because the caregivers didn't allow the self to develop. It was imposed on them, an identity and a behavior and a like belief of who they were and the things they had to perform for the parents to be happy, right? That's a self that probably doesn't develop. Or a kid that develops a very damaged sense of self because the feedback that they receive is very negative, right? So you need to work with that sense of self. And that may not be a memory. Sometimes people think that, oh, that day that my father said that to me, but sometimes it's not a verbal thing. It's an attitude. It's the way they treat you or dismiss you, right? As non-important. I have had clients that come from very large families and they were like invisible, right? Nobody noticed them. So they have a damaged sense of self because they think that they are not important. There's big wounds, right? But are not necessarily trauma because they were already scared by being a nobody, you know? They were just quiet and believing that about themselves. And yes, it's a wound, but you don't treat that specific thing as trauma because it's not connected to fear or to survival. It's connected to adaptation and to the strategies or the schemas that they had to adopt in order for them to belong or to feel connected to the family, right?
Yes. Well, I'll just say, I agree with you with what you said. And the way that I talk, Trauma Therapist Network, when I talk about trauma therapy, I am including that in there, but I understand that there is a distinction between trauma where it's a survival threat and attachment wounds. I'm still including them in trauma, but I understand that, they really are distinct in the way you would treat them. But yes, I just want to say, I'm so glad that you brought those examples up too, because that's not a memory. It's more like a sense or a feeling of how I am isn't right, or I'm not wanted. It's like sometimes when we're trying to understand ourselves and here I'm talking about like myself, not just a quote, a client, because, I'm a client and I'm a therapist. But when you're trying to understand why you feel the way you do about yourself, or why you, to use like the term reenactment, why you repeat these patterns and reenact the way that it felt growing up in your adult relationships. And you want to understand yourself. You're like, what is it? Is it because my dad did this, or my mom did that, or didn't, they never let me do this, or they told me I was bad or something. And when it's a feeling of like, you don't want me to be the way I am, so I have to be a different way for you. I mean, I do feel like, not in the strictest definition, but that's a traumatic experience, to be that how you are isn't
But
right.
that connects you very easily to the idea that if you don't change, you won't be loved. And if you are not loved, you will be left.
And being left would be a survival threat for a child. Yeah,
exactly.
So that's why I do see it the same, but I'm also saying like that I'm really glad you pointed that out, because it's an example of the types of situations that leave people maybe not developing a sense of self, or maybe developing an identity of just worthless or bad. I don't think a lot of people, I don't think even would seek out therapy for that. They would just think they are that way and just hate themselves. And that would be it, until somebody says, hey, therapy could help you.
Absolutely. But if you're bringing up a very important point, because I think we have been playing the game of who to blame for a very long time, since Freud, right? Like, for many decades, the person that suffered was the one to blame. You are either like a resistant, or you are sabotaging your success, or you are whatever, right? Blaming the victim was something we did for a very long time, accusing them for their behavior and rejecting them for who they were because of their actions, right? That was very unfair.
Yeah.
I think in the other side of the pendulum, we are going into blaming our parents for everything we are. And that's another extreme. Because, yes, of course, we are a product of who raised us, who taught us to speak, who taught us to walk, right? We learn everything and we develop. But also, and this is not to blame anybody, like we have certain types of programs innate on us, because we are animals after all, right? We are just a different species, but we are animals that have mechanisms that are there to protect us that end up hurting us. Like you mentioned, just before we started, you mentioned you have had 3 times COVID. When COVID started, I was doing research about COVID, who was going to go to the hospital and all these like machines. And I learned that COVID is not the one that kills us. It's our reaction to the virus that is so aggressive, that our reaction becomes so aggressive that we cannot deal with the phlegms that obstruct our breathing. And that's when we asphyxiate and then we die, right? Sometimes our protective mechanisms are the ones that makes us sick. Like the immune system, like rheumatoid arthritis, for example, you produce so many antibodies to protect you from the bacteria that your immune system, your rheumatic system gets active, and it never goes down, and you develop that type of illness, right? So it's kind of trauma is connected to that. But we also have the capacity to heal, because the same way that, our protections can mess up our health, we also have systems that prefer to heal us than to operate under distress or under difficulties. Right?
Yeah.
So we can use them. So instead of trying to find who to blame, is taking control over our health and work on shifting that tendency of feeling like victims, for example, or completely in danger, and activate our executive functions to assess the level of risk and to accept that it's not as risky as we may have thought. And that is kind of a way to start getting out of that program that is trying to protect us, that is actually making us feel. And life difficult, right? That's what is traumatization. The traumatic event can end in 10 minutes, but the traumatization can last 10 years, 20, if you don't stop it. So we need to stop it.
I would say the traumatic event could last 5 seconds and the effects could last 50 years easily,
right?
Because I see so many people who never even know that the way they feel is related to responses to unmet needs or lack of safety at some point that can change. But if we just stay operating in that space, it's like you were saying about the, what was the word you used? Not homeostasis, but the other word.
Allostasis.
Equilibrium. Having that equilibrium means, we're centered, we're balanced. It's not one or the other. It's not all one thing. And, it's like, I think we just vacillate between blaming ourselves, blaming someone else, blaming ourselves, blaming someone else. And we can't get to a middle space where it's like, this is the way life is. It's full of these types of experiences. How can we get back to center when we are too far in one direction or the other,
Right. So I have an example that it just came to my mind listening to you. Like years ago, I don't know, 100, maybe, I don't know how many years, if you broke a bone, you would probably became incapacitated, right? Like probably had to wear some type of support to walk or something, because your bone was gonna be crooked, right? I think that is a little bit what has happened with trauma. We have been living with broken bones without knowing that we can repair the bone and continue walking straight if we intervene and we do the exact, the precise interventions that need to correct that fracture or that injury.
That's a great point.
Mm-hmm. And we are learning like now that, because now before it was just pure, assumptions. Now science is giving us much more evidence that the bone is broken and needs to be corrected, and that can actually bond again or, right, correct itself.
Yeah. But you have to know it's broken.
Yeah.
So that you need the assessment. You have to have some kind of intervention. You have to do something to it to change what's going on. And then there's a process of learning to walk on it again, strengthening it and all those things. And then.
Right. But if you walk with that broken bone for 10 years, after 10 years, it's not only the broken bone, the one you have to fix. It's your spine, it's your shoulders, it's your head, it's like so many other things that got disturbed by you walking in a way that was not the way you were supposed to walk.
Yeah, the way our system adapts to work with it being broken and just keeps on going. And that's where, those early experiences that are never addressed and then we kind of shape around them, and then
right.
They think that's just the way the world is or the way we are. And it's not that. It's a reaction.
And it is fixable. And yes, the idea that I'm doomed forever. No. Like hopefully changes and people start getting better. We need a stronger world because it's becoming challenging. So many other things, right? Like, the planet is actually walking with a broken bone too.
Yeah, it's sort of like the planet is a metaphor for the way humans are existing in this world, and the planet's got the broken bone and nobody's, taking enough action to address the problem.
Right.
Well, I wish we had more time to go more into this because it's so interesting the way you're explaining it and thinking about it. And I would like to use the last bit of our time, if you would, to talk about how can people who want to understand this systemic way of looking at trauma and healing, what will they find in your book that will help them understand?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is a normalization of our human experiences because I think we have had a tendency to pathologize a lot of our regular experiences, right? If I forget something, oh, you are dissociating, right? Like, no, I'm only forgetting. I'm forgetting is normal. So in my book, I try to talk about all the spectrums on, for emotion, for attachment, for dysregulation, for dissociation, for like, all those, things that we cannot, even trauma, like trauma moves in a continuum. Something can be, like maybe I will stay disturbed for a month. Because when we get an injury, like if we get a cut, it's not going to close immediately. It's going to take a few weeks, couple of weeks to completely close, right? And in the meantime, I have to clean it and take care of it. It doesn't get infected. So the same kind of, so I normalize, and normalizing is, I think is very useful. Psychoeducation is an intervention in its own. If we understand that, yes, we will have emotional wounds. Yes, we will get hurt. That doesn't mean we are ill or we cannot recover, right? So that normalization is important. The other important part is understanding that we need to participate on our healing, not only by going to therapy and respecting the therapist to give us the solution, but by us to go deeper into finding that balance, trying to see the world with a little bit more of that there are ups and downs. And right now I'm in a down, but an up is gonna come because that's how the universe behaves, right? So that is another thing that I try to convey. And understanding. So I talk about developmental trauma, right? For instance, which is very important when we are nonverbal, when we don't have concepts, we still can feel afraid. Actually, we could feel very afraid of dying, right? But our system is not going to traumatize us. It's just going to, as I said with the sweat, it's going to make small changes. And sometimes those little changes will stay forever. Like, that doesn't mean that you have complex trauma and now you are like CPTSD and now you have all the other things. No, it means that you may have some, like scars from those falls, right? Little ones, like for example, the regulation of temperature. There are people that are always cold, or there are people that are always hot. That could come from a developmental issue, but it's just one little thing if you see the whole context of life. Yes, there are certain things that don't go away, but those are scars that we get, and that doesn't mean that we are done for suffering. I'm even writing an article about it because we have been talking about nurture versus nature. And we think that the combination of the two is what makes us who we are in terms of mental health. Well, I think that we need to expand the model to nature, nurture, and consciousness or mind. Because our awareness, the reflective capacities that we are born with, are the ones that can really help us live better lives. So it's not only, I was born like that, or, my parents didn't help me grow. No, I also have a role in my mental health. So it's nature, nurture, and consciousness, or my mind that I own. And I'm not going to allow anybody to take the power from my mind. And if we take the power of our mind, we get better. So that's the other expansion on the idea that we have to contribute.
And you do describe like the process of systemic healing too. At least you begin to in the end of the book. I mean, I don't know. It's not as long as the rest of the book, so there may be much more to say. Yeah, so that's maybe that next book. Yeah.
Exactly.
Antonieta, I'm so grateful that you spent some time with me today talking about this and for this book, which I'll hold up for everyone to see. And where can people find what you do, including this book?
So the book is everywhere, but it has its own website. Like I just opened it recently. It's Traumatization and Its Aftermath.com, or through my website. It's my name, AntonietaContreras.com.
Great.
And yes, all the social media links are there. And I also respond a lot of questions about trauma in 3 different platforms. So specific questions and short answers. I even have like a podcast that is like verbalizing in 6-10 minutes responses of questions about trauma.
I didn't realize that. Well, if you want to give me the link to that, I'll put that in the show notes too.
The name is Ask Me About Trauma. That's the name of the podcast.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah,
Fabulous.
because I think it's important. People will feel better if they know that they are not doomed. And people feel worse and get worse if they feel that they are done with a diagnosis or with.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes even getting a trauma-related diagnosis makes people feel doomed. And I see it as a positive thing because I feel like the alternative is often in our mental health field. It's like, you are just so messed up. It's like, no, you just have trauma. It's okay. It can heal. But that's not the way that everyone feels when they hear that.
Right. Thank you so much. It was very fun to see you, and you are clear-minded as always.
Thanks. Yes. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you for listening to Therapy Chat with your host, Laura Reagan, LCSW-C. For more information, please visit therapychatpodcast.com.